And it's a long section. I think this might be the last section. I don't know. Yeah, we're gonna go over this. It's gonna be fun. I like this book. All right, let's get started. You ready? You ready, Joe? Are you ready, Joe? Joe doesn't want to say anything. Okay, fair enough. Fair enough. I'm ready. How's the internet? Internet good? Looks good. Seems good. About this exercise. In combating racism, we don't make progress if we combat the people themselves. We have we have to combat the cause of racism. If a bandit comes into my house and I have a gun, I cannot shoot the shadow of this bandit. I have to shoot the bandit. Many people lose energy and effort in making sacrifices combating shadows. We have to combat the material reality that produces the shadow. It is important to avoid confusion between the shadow and the body, and that protects the shadow. So they're talking about the system protects racist ideologies, and it shows up materially. So they want us to, he's saying that we should take on the system. The system should be destroyed because the system perpetuates it and allows the power to give people. If you read part 1 and part 2 of these meditations, you expected to find here in part 3 reflections on Wretched's treatment of the pitfalls of class and narrow bourgeois national consciousness. Moreover, you would expect to find in part 4 my reflections on race, i.e., a functional and erroneous categorization of peoples based on actual and imagined social, physical, or biological differences, and racism, i.e., a belief that the plurality of races exists, that some of these so-called races are superior to others, discrimination and exploitation of peoples, using this belief as a rationalization. As I worked on the draft for part 3, and as I begun to outline part 4, it occurred to me that I should switch the order of their subject matter, because I think that race should be discussed and reflected upon prior to the subject of class and national consciousness. This is part 3. We need to address ourselves to the deconstruction of race, i.e., to disapprove and the authenticity of the concept, and we should begin the process of eliminating the word and all racial language from the vocabulary and the consciousness of the world's peoples, all as part of the process of eliminating racism and transforming the material reality that race serves. This has been done because of the probability that no effective revolutionary movement, no meaningful transformation of the world will be generated without incorporating the deconstruction of race process into our theory and practice. The probability exists because race and racism have been the shadows that have historically diverted people's energies and diffused their revolutionary thrust. This applies particularly to the motion of people within what are now U.S. borders, but it is clearly a worldwide phenomenon. Thank you for sharing. I don't know what the heck. I got water, don't worry. As soon as I can get it. Jesus fucking Christ. I spilled it. Okay. None of us are free of the responsibility of uprooting racialized thought and practice within ourselves, and whenever we encounter it, as I see it, at a racist is anyone holding the belief that the human species is divided into a plurality of races, some of which are superior to others. If you employ a racial binary, i.e. black and white, or sun people or snow people, to categorize people when you're a racist and you're practicing racism at the minimum, you confuse the shadow for the body, and you're wasting energy. As I read the third chapter of Wretched, I begin to meditate upon Fanon's discussion of the racism practiced by the neocolonial bourgeois forces, i.e., those black people and Africans who took the places of the European colonial powers at the state level. A racism of defense based on fear, as he called it. I'm going to turn on the light real quick. I forgot to turn on the light. There we go. I can see better. Their racism was adopted and practiced to defend their class interests, to corner the position formerly kept for foreigners, and to become the new ruling class. Their fear is that the people will act in their own interest, topple the bourgeois forces, and pursue the development of revolutionary socialist societies. At the same time, Fanon continues other sectors of the nation, quote, follow in the steps of their bourgeoisie and begin to practice racism against non-nationals. Quote, in the Ivory Coast, the anti-Dahomey and the anti-Voltaic troubles are in fact racial riots. The Dahomey and the Voltaic peoples who control the greater part of the petty trade are once independence is declared the object of hostile manifestation on the part of the people of the Ivory Coast. From nationalism, we have passed to ultranationalism, to chauvinism, and finally to racism. It occurred to me that we, too, engage in racist behavior, largely as a result of following the lead of our bourgeoisie forces. And I know that too many of you can't readily identify these forces. And as you think about it, how naive we all were to believe back in the day that just because folks were black, that alone made them authentic representatives of truth and justice and signified that they were true servants of the people. The pity is, though, that even today, far too many of us still think that way. It ain't the color of the skin, but rather the content of the character. As Brother M.L. King Jr. Reminded us. It's in the third chapter of Wretched that Fanon tells us that racialized thought and practice is one of the pitfalls of narrow bourgeoisie nationalist consciousness. It causes the bourgeois forces at the head of the people's struggle to develop a neo-colonial shell game, whereby the nation is passed over for the race and the tribe is preferred to the state. Later, Fanon describes it very succinctly as a, quote, narrow nationalism and representing a race. Fanon's purposes, instead of revolutionary nationalism, socialist consciousness and program, incorporating attention to the elimination of racism, consciously avoiding all forms of racialism, the categorization of peoples in racial terms, while also defeating the bourgeois forces that stand in the way of the people's struggle for genuine independence and socialist development. Wretched addresses the deconstruction of race because Fanon clearly urges the abandonment of racial identities, and he proposes the adoption of identities based on class or nationality. He encourages us to begin to identify ourselves as human. Wretched is about the deconstruction of race because Fanon calls for the elimination of racism as part of the process of transforming oppressed peoples into new people, as they build new socialist nations, and as they help to build socialist worlds. As I reflect upon all this, I was taken back to my reading of Warwick Fanon's For Beginners. I felt the need to shape this part in a way that I hadn't originally intended, incorporating the challenging certain claims made by Warwick with regards to Fanon's view on race and class. The alleged deliverance that she claims to have existed between the thought of Fanon and the thought of Marx on this and other significant subject matter. Facts is, Warwick Weinrich has an obvious bias against scientific socialism, Marxism, which is linked to her desire to establish the priority of race over class, i.e., to allege the irrelevance and inapplicability of socialism to the struggles of underdeveloped countries and peoples while positioning bourgeoisie forces to leadership. Hello, everybody. My aim is making what may appear to be an excessive incursion into Weinreich's works is to shed light on the parallel between Fanon's treatment of bourgeoisie forces in Wretched and what should be our treatment of the bourgeoisie forces in our midst. Points must be made, seeds must be planted for the development of theory and practice around this theme. The deconstruction of race and successful revolutionary struggle requires that we deal with the role of bourgeoisie forces, especially those who fiend a progressive, radical, and nationalist stand. It requires that all forms of national class struggle, ideological, political, and economic, be engaged with these allies of capitalism, whose fear of socialism caused them to use the shadow of race in defense of their class interests while diverting the people from anti-capitalist struggle. Recall, we're talking about the same bourgeois forces who under a confused and militant guise clouded the issue with skin analysis at the height of the last upsurge. The only reason we have to get together is the color of our skin. The only reason we have to get together is the color of our skin. They oppress us because we are black, and we are going to use that blackness to get out of the trick bag they put us in. And we're going to build a movement in this country based on the color of our skin. Black people do not want to take over this country. They want to be in the whites' place because that is where a decent life can be had. What does Fanon say? Quote, there is no native who does not dream at least once a day of setting himself up in the settler's place. I'm going to read down here. The zones where the natives live is not complementary to the zone inhabited by the settlers. The two zones are opposed, but not in the service of a higher unity, obedient to the rules of pure Aristotelian logic. Aristotle. It's like Aristotle's, but they used Aristotelian logic. They both follow the principles of reciprocal exclusivity. No conciliation is possible for the two terms. One is superfluous. The settler's town is a strongly built town, all made of stone and steel. It is a brightly lit town. The streets are covered with asphalt, and the garbage cans swallow all the leavings, unseen, unknown, and hardly thought about. The settlers' feet are never visible except perhaps in the sea, but there you are, never close enough to see them. His feet are protected by strong shoes, although the streets of his town are clean and even, with no holes or stones. The settler's town is a well-fed town, an easy-going town. Its belly is always full of good things. The settler's town is a town of white people, of foreigners. The town belonging to the colonized people, or at least a native town, the black person's village, the Median, how do you say that word? Medina. I'm gonna look it up.
Medina.
Medina? Do we know what it is?
Yeah. No.
All right, let's find out. Medina. What did I say wrong? Oh, that's what I did wrong. Okay, it's the typical walled, old, historic, and often car-free section of the North American city characterized by northern maze-like streets. Okay, so okay. The reservation is a place of ill fame, peopled by men of evil repute. They they are born there. It matters little where and or how they died there. It matters not where or nor how. It is a world without spaciousness. Men live there on top of each other, and their huts are built on top of the other. The native town is a hungry town, starved of bread, of meat, of shoes, of coal, of light. The native town is a crouching village, a town on its knees, a town wallowing in the mire. It is a town of
Fire.
inwards. Sorry, it is thank you, Meyer. It is a town of inwards and dirty Arabs. Sorry. The look that the native turns on the settler's town is a look of lust, a look of envy. It expresses his dreams of possession, all matters of possession, to sit at the settler's table, to sleep at the settler's bed, with his wife, if possible. The colonized man is an envious man, and this the settler knows very well. When their glances meet, he ascertains bitterly, always on the defensive. They want to take our place. It is true, for there is no native who does not dream, at least once a day, of setting himself up in the settler's place. All right, let's go back. All right. This is the native that Fanon describes as wanting to take the place of the settler. Is not yet an ex-native, the person who comes to realize that it is not his skin or the settler's skin that matters, and that merely being in the settler's place will not change the inherent and exploitative character of the system of colonialism, i.e. capitalism. Let's be clear, to merely want to be, quote, in the settler's place means that you really like the system, you support the system, and you just complain because you think you're not getting your piece of the pie. There's a direct link between saying the skin analysis in the mid 1960s and the reason that Black Power went from a revolutionary slogan to a combinationist one, taken up even by the rulers of capital and reshaping as green power and black capitalism and what we today know as empowerment, or as we call it, a piece of the action. It is no accident that the mass consciousness today is heavily racialized and not revolutionary, just as black nationalism became ethnic pluralism and cultural equality in the form pushed by the rightist tendencies of Afrocentricity, centricity. The real revolutionaries were disrupted and fell by the wayside. The bourgeoisie forces filled the vacuum, and today the people think that racial feelings is the same as revolutionary thought and practice. As I begin to think through the writings of this part, it also occurs to me that I should begin by reasserting the point that these meditations constitute an exercise for all of us, the exercise of something like a field strewn with seeds, to which we must return and cultivate. That is, we should begin to initiate deliberate, ongoing studies, debates, public discussions, and mass-based struggles. We should adopt new stands and new styles of work, all with the aim of changing ourselves, helping to change other people, and to change the world. Within the context of the present subject matter, first bullet point, we should ideally study everything written by or about Fanon, to draw from the strength and relevancy of his analyses of the problem of racism and colonialism as we battle them in the forms that they assume today in our social environment. We should ideally study and critique everything where written in the origins of development of the word and concept race and the practice of racism. These should be linked to the engagement with public discussion that help to shape new anti-racial and non-racial and pro-socialist concepts and social relations. We should take up studies and struggle that re-examine presently held so-called truths about race, while raising new questions on the relations between racism and and capitalism, i.e., IG. How did differences in social customs and physical characteristics become racialized based on the class and national exploitation of people, and subsequently become the fetishized forms of discrimination in their own right? We should study everything. We should study everything. We should study everything every written on the subject of class and class struggle, approaching the study critically, and help to create new concepts and language that gives them an immediate meaning to people who may not know the names Marx, but who need to know that they are members of a class consciousness for itself, or unconsciousness in itself, and they and their fellow class members are either leading or being led active or passive participants in struggle with other classes for control of their lives and futures. People need to know that class, like race, is a socially constructed concept. But unlike race, the concept of class arises from the observation of actual contradictions resulting from the unequal appropriation of the social wealth by one group at the expense of another. We use the concept to help us understand the process of mechanisms of social division and social revolutionary change. People need to know that class struggle is taking place every minute in every sphere of our lives, and that it can be understood as struggle between regression, capitalism, and progress, socialism, no matter what terms. We used to identify the opposing forces, i.e., decolonization is the meeting of two forces opposed to each other by their very nature. All right, I'm going to read something below. All right. Decolonization, which sets out to change the order of the world, is obviously a program of complete disorder, but it cannot come as a result of magical practices, nor of a natural shock, nor of a friendly understanding. Decolonization, as we know, is a historical process. That is to say that it cannot be understood, it cannot become intelligible, nor clear of itself except in the exact measure that we can discern the movement which give it historical form and content. Decolonization is the meeting of two forces opposed to each other by their very nature, which in fact owe their originality to that sort of substantification which results from and is nourished by the situation in the colonies. Their first encounter was marked by violence and their existence together. That is to say, the exploitation of the native by the settler was carried on by the dint of the great array of bayonets and cannon. The settler and the native are old acquaintances. In fact, the settler is right when he speaks of knowing them well, for it is the settler who has brought the native into existence and who perpetuate his existence. The settler owes the fact of his very existence, that is to say, his property, to the colonial system. That is term such as settler or bourgeoisie can be used to identify regressive pro-capitalist forces, in terms such as native or proletariat can be used to identify the progressive revolutionary forces. Those must represent those most representative of the struggles for socialism. I don't doubt that we may need new terms, i.e., other than bourgeoisie and proletarian, but it won't matter that what terms we use if we don't know what it is that we struggle against and what it is that we struggle for. If we can't if we can't relate the terms to the concrete ways that we live and to the ways that we want to live, let me try to illustrate the point, which is that we need to shape and share a vision of a kind of socialist society that we want to build, a vision developed in part through the critique of the bourgeoisie capitalist order and now oppressing us all. Fanon made a crucial point that under the colonial system, a middle class which accumulates capital is an impossible phenomenon. Now, precisely, it would seem that the historical vocation of this authentic national middle class in an underdeveloped country is to repudiate its own nature insofar as it is bourgeois. That is to say, is so far as it is the tool of capitalism and to make itself the willing slave that of that revolutionary capital, which is the people. We don't. I'm waiting for this thing. I don't know where it might have happened.
It's right there. You just saw it.
Did I just miss it? Oh, there it is. Okay, cool.
Okay.
In an underdeveloped country, the authentic national middle class ought to consider as its burden, but bounded duty, to betray the calling fate as has marked out for it, and to put itself to the school with the people. In other words, to put at the people's disposal the intellectual and technical capital that it has snatched when going through the colonial universities. But unhappily, we shall see that very often the national middle class does not follow the heroic, positive, fruitful, and just path. Rather, it disappears with its soul set at peace into the shocking ways, shocking because anti-national of the traditional bourgeoisie, which is unintelligent, contempt, con, contempt, contemptibly,
Actively.
cynically bourgeoisie. We do not have to engage in industrial productivity or live below the poverty line in order to be proletarian revolutionary or to begin developing a proletarian revolutionary socialist consciousness. It is, however, necessary that we repudiate our own nature in so far as it is bourgeois. Amilcar Cabral. Let's see what Amilcar Cabral has to say. With the okay, maybe not yet. With the paragraph at 6.3, Fanon planted a seed that was later cultivated by Amilcar Cabral. Fanon was expressing that's what's now commonly referred to as a concept and process of class suicide, which is most associated with Cabral and rarely, if ever, with Fanon. Cabral's elaboration held that, here he is, to truly fulfill the role in the national liberation struggle, the revolutionary petite bourgeoisie must be capable of committing suicide as a class in order to be reborn as revolutionary workers, completely identify with the deepest aspiration of the people to which they belong. This alternative, to betray the revolution or to commit suicide as a class, constitutes a dilemma of the petty bourgeoisie in the general framework of the national liberation struggle. The positive solution in favor of the revolution depends on what Fidel Castro recently called the development of revolutionary consciousness. This independent necessarily calls for attention to the
This
capacity to the
this
capacity of
dependence.
of viable revolutionary national consciousness, particularly for all people within U.S. borders. What? I don't know what happened. To commit class suicide means to kill the class consciousness of the bourgeois capitalist order that exercises hegemony in our lives and minds. We tend to think of revolutionary activity as that which takes place outside of ourselves, as overthrowing the capitalist institutions of poverty relations, but we seldom think of the need to uproot the bourgeoisie ideas in our own minds, to repudiate the values, morals, and entire range of beliefs that we now hold insofar as they are bourgeoisie. So we need to get rid of our bourgeoisie thoughts, our liberalism. We have to keep criticizing our liberal tendencies, because that's bourgeoisie thoughts. When Cabral calls us to be reborn as revolutionary workers, most of us don't get beyond the tired images of the industrial proletariat or working class. But Cabral actually suggests images of any and all men and women who strive to become completely identified with the deepest aspiration of the people to which they belong, to become people who work to produce revolutionary transformation in their society and within their individual selves. We need to critically study everything ever written on origins of the word and concept nation, and on the evolution of nationalism. While engaged in this study, we must avoid the quagmire of both bourgeoisie and doctrinaire Marx's interpretation. Like race and class, the word and concept nation has also been socially constructed by peoples as they have made their own history and defined from the perspective of their own needs and interests. In one respect, we need to treat the question of nations similar to the way Cabral treated the question of the motive forces of history with respect of the class struggle. But such treatment were likely to realize that nations existed in the world prior to their appearance in Europe. We must come to distinguish modern from pre-modern, capitalist from pre-capitalist, nation sovereignty from oppressed nations. And just as there is pro-capitalist bourgeoisie nationalism, there is also pro-socialist revolutionary nationalism. Thereby, people shape a new nationality in the implacable struggle which opposes socialism to capitalism. And here we go. All the jacqueries and desperate deeds, all those bands armed with cutlasses or axes, find their nationality in the implacable struggle which opposes socialism and capitalism. Okay, I'm looking for the next one just in case. Oh, there it is. Okay. We must also cultivate a new stand, i.e., a philosophy, methodology, and theory underlining socialism, or better said, revolutionary humanism, new consciousness of the fundamental interests of the revolutionary class. We'll talk later on why I put the word within quotation marks, and the method to be used by its organization and its institutions to realize its objectivity, yeah, and begin to practice new styles of work. For example, cast off mental reservations that Fanon mentioned. I'm going to read something. And begin to talk to the people, especially talk to them about socialism, the subject that Fanon says is most feared by the masters of capital. Self-criticism has been much talked about of late, but few people realize that it is an African institution, rather in the Dajimas or of Northern Africa, or in the meeting of Western Africa. Traditions demand that the quarrels which occur in the village should be settled in public. And there's my visibility. There we go. In the public. It is communal self-criticism. Yeah, it is a communal self-criticism, of course, and with a note of humor, because everybody is relaxed and because in the last resort, we all want the same thing. But the more the intellectual imbibes the atmosphere of the people, the more completely he abandons the habits of calculation, of unwanted silence, of mental reservation, and shakes off the spirit of concealment. And it is true that already that at that level we can say that the community triumphs and that it spreads its own light and its own reason. All right, let me go back up. And there we go. However, we need to learn to introduce the socialist alternative to people without always having to use the word. That is, until we've proven ourselves to people, gain their trust, and overcome their fears of the anti-communist propaganda spread by those who rule. We need to learn how to discuss socialist alternatives so that people don't trust to push the panic button and can come to recognize these alternatives as reasonable and feasible. We need to begin to build communist transitional structures wherever possible so that the people can experience socialism in their lives and break those of the grip of capitalist propaganda. We need to begin to fight for socialism here and now, if as so many of us say, in the defense of our own laziness. All right. The people around us aren't talking about socialism. It should be easy to see that part of the reason for their silence on the matter is our silence on it. Moreover, talking about socialism using examples or scenarios drawn from our own immediate circumstances demands that we talk about building non-racial socialist society, as does, for example, Julius Nyerere, who held that the basis of socialism is a belief in the oneness of humanity and its common historical journey. To paraphrase him, socialism is not for the benefit of black, brown, Asian, they use the other word, and white people. Its purpose is to serve of all people, and there can be no socialism without acceptance of human quality. This exercise is about more than our desire to read and understand Wretched, as if it were about some abstract world or not our own. It's about more than our need to understand the failures of the anti-colonial struggles on the African continent. This exercise is also about us and about some of the things that we need to understand and to change in ourselves and our world. It is about our need to begin a mass-based and a mass-orientated debate on race and class and on capitalism and socialism. This exercise is about us because too many of us still think that the enemy is white people, or the problem is white racism, i.e., as if only white people can be racist. Ooh, I don't know if I agree with that. There are too many of us who fail to target the capitalist system as the enemy, as the problem. Too many of us who equate racial equality with liberation. In this instance, however, we fail to equate liberation with the end to all forms of social alienation and economic exploitation that are characteristic of capitalist society. We fail to equate empowerment with the kind of power held by the people in a genuine people's democratic order. I'm gonna make sure. Okay. Spinning, is it still spinning? Shouldn't be spinning. Is it still spinning?
No, we're back.
Okay. Where'd it go?
I don't know, but it kicked me at one point.
Yeah. As I read Wretched and come across Fanon's discussion of the petty bourgeois orientation of blackism They said the N word, and I think we can say negritude. No, it can't. Oops. It can't be helped. It can't but make connections of Afrocentricity and realize that the predominant character of the latter leads up to the same kind of blind alley entered by men of African culture, of which Fanon spoke. As Fanon discussed Manichaeism and racialized binary thinking, it can't help I can't help but make connections to those among who want to discuss race treason and treason of whiteness, without also discussing treason to the very idea of race, or the treason to blackness, as if it's significant to the dismantle only one side of the racialized binary construction. Blackness is no less a unnatural social construction than is whiteness, and it is no less in need of deconstruction. Connection can also be made to the use of black as a political and not a racial term. Without defining the politics, black is not truly de-racialized in this instance. What's needed is an analysis of the political spheres that one has reference to, and the adoption of one or more new terms to describe the politics that we previously termed black, i.g., revolutionary humanist politics. Forms of the race of racism and colonialism that Wretched addressed when it was published remain obstacles to our efforts to overthrow capitalism, and will continue to be so until we dismantle them. We need to fully understand that they are how they manifest themselves today of what accounts for their realness in their lives and how we can eliminate them. This exercise is about us because we must be able to clearly define the nature of our struggle and come to have the definition shared by the majority of the people. We must name what we struggle against and name what we struggle for. That is, we are merely struggling against white people. Are we merely struggling against racism for non-racial but capitalist society? Are the principal relations that we need to uproot mere race relations? So-called race relations have had very little to do with race. Initially, it was an historical accident that the people encountered in the European expansion differed in shape and shared physical characteristics of an obvious kind. But once the racial ideologies had been formed and widely disseminated, they constituted a powerful means of justifying political hegemony and economic control. A non-racial society can only be achieved by socialist revolutionary actions of the masses, for it is impossible to separate race relations from the capitalist relations in which they have their roots. All right, let's make sure. Okay, good. Right there. Okay. At the bottom, so-called race relations are economic relations between groups of peoples, better distinguished as class and or as nationalities, just as Fanon pointed to conceptions as the motive for the practice of racism in the newly independent countries of Africa. Contemporary research reveals a similar motivation for the deployment of a very concept race and racialized exploitation. Here we go. We have said that the native bourgeoisie, which comes to power, uses its class aggressiveness to corner the position formerly held by the foreigners. On the morrow of independence, in fact, if it violently attacks the colonial personalities, barristers, traders, landed proprietors, doctors, and higher civil servants, it will fight to the bitter end against these people who insult our dignity as a nation. It waves aloof the notion of nationalization, of Africanization of the ruling classes. The fact is that such actions will become more and more tinged with racism until the bourgeoisie bluntly puts the problem to the government by saying, we must have this post. they will not stop their snarling until they have taken over everyone. The working class of the towns, the masses of unemployed, the small artisans and craftsmen, for their part, line up behind this nationalist attitude. But in all justice, let it be said, they only follow in the steps of the bourgeoisie. Hold on a second. I gotta do another appeal. Fucking hell. Fucking wild. If the national bourgeoisie goes into completion with the Europeans, the artisans and craftsmen start as fight against non-national Africans in the Ivory Coast, in the anti-Dahomey and anti-Voltic troubles are in fact racial riots. The Dahomey and Voltic peoples, who control the greater part of the petty trade, are once independence is declared the object of hostile manifestations on the part of the people of the Ivory Coast. From nationalism, we have passed to ultranationalism, to chauvinism, and finally to racism. These foreigners are called on to leave their shops or burned, their streets, stalls are wrecked, and in fact, the government of the Ivory Coast commands them to go, thus giving the national satisfaction. We observe a permanent seesaw between African unity, which fades quicker and quicker into the midst of oblivion, and a heartbreaking return to chauvinism in its most bitter and detestable form. Back up to here. The difference that we know now, the difference that we now know is as racial, i.e. perceived fundamental biological differences, we initially derived from social and cultural differences between localized and self-conscious people, groups of people that began to interact. Physical differences between them meant little or nothing in themselves unless and until the interaction began to involve competition, and one group meant to begin taking unfair advantage of the labor and resources of another. The kind of economic competition that would have an individual or class character within a localized, homogeneous social settings of the single group came to take on a we-they character as the competition came to involve social and national distinct peoples. Differences in customs and physical appearances were then interpreted as biological, ranked hierarchically group of national relations became race relations, as race became a shadow used to divert attention from the actual motive and process of economic relationships. In other words, the development of the concept race and the practice of racism rest on the particular material reasons for elevating social and physical differences to the level of biogenetics, ideology, and rationale for the exploitation of peoples. That's heavy. Did Fanon regard race as a minor term? One of Fanon's most lasting insights is that race is not a minor term. Indeed, that race not only changes the equation, but may call for an entirely new calculus. In part 2, I set out a number of questions that I later realized could be used to frame this exercise. The questions in part 2 were: what is violence and why is it always necessary? What is decolonization? What is social structures, and why is change therefore a necessary criterion for the success of the struggle? What does Fanon mean by species, and why does he put it within quotation marks? Why does Fanon refer to the restoration of nationhood, and what is a nation? The question of this part was to have been, what does Fanon mean by the term species? To that, I now add, what was Fanon's position on the subject of race, racism, and class? Did he regard colonialism as primarily a racial or primarily an economic relationship? The answers draw from my reading of Wretched and Fanon seem to be at odds with those drawn by Weinrich. If we read Wretched, especially if done along with the exercise, then we may have concluded, as I have, that Fanon regarded Manichaean and racist ideologies as means used to rationalize the oppression of peoples and to legitimize their exploitation. Further, you may have concluded on the broader scale that race and racism help to create, reproduce, and reinforce hierarchies that are rooted in class and national relations of economic exploitation. In Fanon's view, Manichaeism and racism serve the interests of colonialism. The colonized person who adopt these forms of thought lack an understanding of the nature of the true decolonization process and its vision of the future nation and world. For example, when Fanon says that the line and method of the struggle prefigured humanist goals, he's reminding us that, among other things, the colonial order is based on a racist dualism, and a new society must be rest upon or otherwise include this form of thought and practice. In Wretched, we easily see that Fanon encouraged us to abandon and to deconstruct racist Manichaeism, which must involve the deconstruction of the concept race in all racialized thought. I also think it is clear that Fanon does not subordinate class to race, nor oppose revolutionary nationalism to socialism, as I think Weinrich would have us believe. Weinrich describes Black Skin's White Mask as Fanon's study of group, racial identity, with its fundamental assumption being that it juxtaposition, that means parallel, to the so-called black and white races created in form of collective mental illness. Both races are locked within the constraints of color, but Fanon's emphasis here is on the formation, meaning the effect of blackness, emphasized at it. I hasten to point out first that we are all still collectively mentally ill, evidence of which is our use of the language of race. The phrase both races shouldn't be used to describe the groups in question. This usage shows that the deconstruction of the concept of race has to be based on the elimination of racial language. Go back to part 1 and meditate on the discussion of Nguyen Juan Thiago's treatment of the thought and practice of colonized intellectuals who, quote, did not always adequately evaluate the real enemy and continue to see things in terms of skin pigmentation, clinging to the reductionism to the polarities of color and race. Too many of us continue to use the language of race even as we claim to be engaged in the struggle against racism, racial ideologies, and for a new collective identity. References to the realness of race are the means through which race as a reality is constructed. Have you really thought about that line since you first read it? How much thought have you given to this one? We always agreed that race is invented, but are then required to differ to its embeddedness in the world. We aren't really required to make such deferrals. It's more a matter of our own consciousness, convictions, and courage. This is one of those seeds that we gotta come back to and cultivate. We're actually required to decide upon new terms, to form new definitions, to engage and become consistent in their use and application. In my last reference to Reinrich, I emphasized the word both to help point out that we're locked within the constraints of color, which is one of the effects of blackness, and of accepting it as an authentic identity. Fanon's examination of blackness was attention given to one side of the racialized binary construction that needs to be dismantled. It it wasn't done to authenticate or perpetuate the use of the term black to identify a people. As we'll see below, Fanon actually sought to show a spurious nature, sur, spurious nature of blackness. Yeah, as Weinrich herself says in this regard, our task is, in part, to free ourselves from the constraint of color and to reject the categories through which others seeks to imprison us. Yea, black people are a creation of colonialism, and as an identity, it's really a form of imprisonment. In her glossary, Weinrich defines racism as institutionalized assignment of values to real or imaginary differences in order to justify aggression and protect privilege. I couldn't find a definition of racism as such in Wretched, but Reinrich provides a useful passage when describing Fanon's response to the claim that European civilization wasn't responsible for colonial racism. Colonial racism is no different from any other racism. All forms of exploitation are identical because all of them are applied to the same object, man. Is Fanon's defining racism as a form of exploitation, or is he, like Weinrich, saying that all forms of racism is used to facilitate exploitation? If he's saying that former, it would seem to be a definition of racism similar to those promoted here post 1970, which tend to conflate racism and colonialism, or mass colonialism, by defining racism as a system of exploitation rather than a tool used by the exploitative system. This confuses us and leads us to struggle against racism, but not necessarily against capitalism and for socialism. Moreover, if Fanon is saying that racism is used to facilitate exploitation, doesn't that raise questions, at least about the context within which to view? Reinrich claims that Fanon didn't regard race as a minor term in colonial situation. The questions are important because we must be able to distinguish Fanon's thought from Reinrich's, and we must be able to understand in general and with regard to Fanon's thought and Wretched, the relations of race and to class and nation, the relations of race to the overthrowing of capitalism and the construction of socialism. Weinrich used a discussion of negritude to not only set the stage for her claim that race wasn't a minor term for Fanon, but also that he regarded race as opposed to class or economic relations as a key categorical term in colonial situations. She says that Fanon says that Fanon was in Black Skin's White Mask ambivalent towards negritude. On the one hand, holds that it exposed gifts worthy of celebration, and on the other hand, that it was capable of drowning people of color in the tide of regression. Fanon is skeptical of reversing racist stereotypes as assigning positive instead of negative values to them. Weinrich discusses negritude again in her chapter on Wretched. I've looked, but couldn't find any use of the term negritude in my copy translation of Black Skin's White Mask. What I did find is used of the term, I can't say that one, black, the word for black, but I ism. And I have to do another one. Ugh. Based in part and on my reading of the excerpt of from Black Skin's White Mask that I used below, I think Fanon used blackism. I'm going to say that. In Wretched, they used the N-word. In Wretched to indicate development of his thought on the disappearance of black, the word black, but inward. As when he says that inwards are disappearing and that inwardhood is a relationship that's on the way out as the disappearance of the colonized personality. Reinrich continues, Fanon sees negritude as is an important tool for finding meaning and worth in the hostile world, even if it does not ultimately provide an adequate foundation for black identity. It is on this point that he disagrees with Sartre. I can't help myself because every opportunity must be taken to point up the contradiction. Fanon, we're told sees negritude as a important tool, even if it does not ultimately provide an adequate foundation for black identity. Fanon didn't seek an adequate foundation for black identity. He sought a foundation for national identity, or for identity as a revolutionary class, or for identity as new people, a new humanity, a new species of humanity, not in any way characterized by or as race. Hold on a second, I'm gonna look ahead. Okay, there's that one. Okay. Okay, there's one stopping point. Rodney. Okay, there's another stopping point. Okay. Where was I at? I should have found out. Okay, where is that? Okay, there. Now, why was it necessary to bring Sartre into the discussion of Fanon's thinking of negritude? It contend that it was done to give us a false lead, to set up a false contradiction between revolutionary nationalism and socialism. According to Reinrich, Sartre claimed that negritude was the moment of negativity and the Marxist Hegelian historical dialectic, and the predetermined stage necessary to the victory of the proletariat, where race will not matter. Fanon is outraged. What are we to believe that Fanon was outraged about? That Sartre allegedly held that the society could be built where race wouldn't matter. We could, I guess, read Sartre's as presented by Weinreich as claiming that negritude itself represented a stage act which race no longer mattered. Or we could read that the arrival of negritude represented the beginning of a process that would lead to the society where race wouldn't matter. Or it is simply that Fanon was supposedly outraged over the claim that race didn't matter or would not matter at some point in the future. According to Weinreich, Fanon's alleged outrage is expressed here. Quote, at the very moment when I was trying to grasp my own being, Sartre, who remained the other, was reminding me that my blackness was only a minor term, without a black past, without a black future. They use the N-word, by the way. It was impossible for me to live my inwardhood, blackhood. Well, maybe my interpretative ability to faulty, right? Faulty? Ability is faulty. Okay. But I don't think there's only one way of reading this passage. What do you think? Here is Fanon saying that when he was trying to grasp his being as black, Sartre reminded him that blackness or race is only a minor term, or a shadow, and that it's really not a question of living a black hood. They use the N-word, but something more. It could be that if Fanon had written in a style like mine, that words blackness and N-word for black would have been accented, right? All right?
Center.
Accented so as to clearly suggest that he too had come to agree that his identity should be something other than blackhood or blackness. Weinrich continues. I don't know if this Weinrich person's good. One of Fanon's most lasting insights is that race is not a minor term. Indeed, that race not only changes the equation, but may call for the entire new calculus. And just a classless society may be possible, but it is not the same as a raceless one, nor can it be achieved without each race disalienating itself. As long as one race is defined by its differences from the other, both will be fettered by racist formations. Their job, however, are not to enlighten or redeem each other. It is in this earlier works, even as he recognized the reciprocal effects that racism has, Fanon emphasizes individuals' will and essential autonomy. No matter what a black man has been taught to want, Fanon is clear about what he should do. He must act to release himself from the tyrannies of past exploitation and present degradation. He must cast off his mask, break the deforming mirror, look at himself steadily, and see a free human being. Again, note the differences too. The embeddedness, i.g., each race, one race, etc. All this argument for the importance of race from a person who says that racism sees the world in unreal categories and is inherently unreasonable. Unlike Weinrich, I hold that a truly just and classless society is the same as a raceless one. But let's look again at the last sentence of that paragraph. A just and classless society can't be achieved without each race disalienating itself. Precisely the objective I thought was this is what Fanon was saying all along, especially because the concept of de-alienation is one that he uses to describe the process of each race becoming free human beings, even though at times they may also identity themselves as say Algerians. For clarity, alienation was caused by the creation and adoption of racial identities. Thus, disalienation seeks to dismantle and abandon such identities. Fanon's own words in Black Skin's White Mask tend to throw a different interpretation upon the passage, in which Weinrich claims Fanon's outrage and the theme of his longing for a black hood. They use the N-word. Though extensive, I am using most of the excerpts in order to give as much information as possible upon which to base your own interpretation. Here's another one. The black person, they use the N-word, however sincere, is a slave of the past, face to face with the white man. The black person has a past to legitimate. Those black people and white men will be disalienated, who refuse to let themselves be sealed away in a materialized tower of the past. For many other black person, in other ways, disalienation will come into being through their refusal to accept the present as definitive. I am a man, and what I have to recapture is the whole past of the world. I am not responsible solely for the revolt of Santo Domingo. In no way should I derive my basic purpose from the past of the peoples of color. In no way should I dedicate myself to reveal an unjustly unrecognized black civilization. I will not make myself the man of any past. I do not want to exalt the past at the expense of my present and of my future. And there's another one. They just love this, don't they? In this world, which is already trying to disappear, do I have to pose the problem of black truth? Do I have to be limited to the justification of a facial confirmation? There is no black mission. There is no white burden. My life is caught in the lasso of existence. My freedom turns my back on myself. No, I do not have the right to be black. I find myself suddenly in the world, and I recognize that I have one right alone, that demanding human behavior from the other. One duty alone, that of not renouncing my freedom through my choices. I have no wish to be a victim of the fraud of a black world. There is no white world. There is no white ethnic any more than there is a white intelligence. I am not the slave. I am not the slave of the slavery that dehumanized my ancestors. The disaster of the man of color lies in the fact that he was enslaved. The disaster of the humanity of the white man lies in the fact that somewhere he has killed man. I, the man of color, want only this, that the tool never be possess the man. The black is not any more than the white man. Before I can adopt a passive voice, freedom requires an effort of disalienation. It is through the efforts to recapture the self and to scrutinize the self as it is self. It is through the last tension of their freedom that men will be able to create their ideal condition of existence for the human world. Superiority and inferiority. Why not quite simply attempt to touch the other, to feel the other, and to explain the other to myself? Does it sound as if Fanon would truly be encouraged to remain at a reminder by Satri? Huh?
You said encouraged. It's outraged.
Oh yeah, outraged. Yeah, does it sound that as if Fanon would truly be outraged at the reminder by Satri that his blackness, his black past, his black future, his black hood, is his race or racial identity was only a minor term? Fanon himself calls for the disalienation of both races. He pointed to the black people and urged them not to accept their present as definitive, including their present identity as black people. So, did Fanon regard race as a minor term? In my opinion, yes, which doesn't mean that he didn't regard race or racism as salient. And we have 15 minutes. Let me see where we got for 15 minutes. Who's in there? No one's in the viewers. See, yeah, Dooley came in. Hey, Dooley. Let me look ahead real quick. 15 minutes. I know where to stop. Wait, that's more than... you think I can read? Wait, let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4... 5 pages in 15 minutes? No?
I think so.
Okay. We go over just a little bit. Okay. The key categories, race or class. In general, Fanon agrees with Marx that history runs dialectically through the struggle of factions against factions. But whereas Marx categorized factions in terms of economic class, Fanon claims that race is a key categorical term in colonial situations. This is Weinrich that said that. I mentioned earlier that the front cover of my copy of Wretched says that the book is Fanon's study of racism and colonialism in the world today. I've had to remind myself that this description of the book was probably one developed by Grove Press and not by Fanon. It may be that the publisher chose to use the word racism as a kind of selling point aimed at Western audiences. Nevertheless, it is used to the cover get it okay. Nevertheless, its use on the cover gives the impression that racism is the major running theme of Wretched, which ain't necessarily so. I mean, Fanon did use the word racism until he reaches the third chapter.
Never use.
Okay, let me read it. I mean, Fanon never used the word racism until he reaches the third chapter, and then the connection with racism and racialized thought of the colonized bourgeoisie forces and other sectors of the colonized population that taken their lead from these forces. Again, Fanon understood racism as a tool of colonialism and of bourgeoisie rule. We can speculate as to what Fanon would have written as a selling point for the cover. We're left to read the book for ourselves to determine whether or not Fanon truly regarded race as the key category term and process of decolonization. Left to read for ourselves to uncover Fanon's own description of the principles relationship of objectives of colonized peoples and his own articulation of the relations of race and racism to the struggle against colonialism. However, the key point of this, from him to have regarded race as a key category term of colonial situation, he would have to have understood race as racialized relations as the essential or the universal relations between people and not an incidental or contingent relations. I doubt that he did so. I think that Fanon knew that racism as a means of discrimination is based on the belief in the existence of race, a belief that it's a real, legitimate, natural way of categorizing people. That is, there'd be no race without a belief that there are biological, identifiable, and distinguishable races, which stand in relation to each other as inherently superior or inferior. Thus, to combat racism, we must also combat the belief in race. We must assist the slow drawing of our consciousness upon truths that are only partial, limited, and unstable. Fanon actually wastes no time to tell us that Wretched is about national liberation, national renaissance, and restoration of nationhood to the people, decolonization. There's no race is the key here. And what does Fanon list as a fundamental task for colonized peoples? He says that the defeat of colonialism is the real object of the struggle. He also affirms that liberation and the national territory is continual struggle against colonialism in its new forms and an obstinate I can't say the damn word. Can you say the word?
Obstinate.
Obstinate refusal to enter the charmed circles of mutual admiration at the summit. It doesn't seem to wait. Making sure, did I miss it? I did. We're gonna stop here. The settler is not simply the man that must be killed. Many members of the mass of the colonialists reveal themselves to be much, much nearer to the national struggle than certain sons of the nation. The bearers of blood and race prejudice are broken down on both sides. In the same way, not every black person or Muslim is issued with the hallmark of genuineness and the gun or the knife. It is not inevitable. I can't say the word. Inevitability. No, inevitable. Right? Inevitability. Inevitably reached for when the settler makes his appearance. Consciousness slowly dawns upon truths that are only partial, limited, and unstable. As we may surmise, all this is very difficult. These politics are national, revolutionary, and social, and these new facts which the native will now come to know exist only in action. They are the essence of the fight which explodes the whole colonial truths and reveals unexpected facets, which brings out new meanings and pinpoints the contradictions camouflaged by these facts. The people engage in the struggle who, because of it, command and know these facts, go forward free from colonialism and forewarned at all attempts to mystification, inoculated against all national anthems. Violence alone, violence committed by the people, violence organized and educated by its leaders, makes it possible for the masses to understand social truths and give the key to them. Without that struggle, without the knowledge of the practice of action, there's nothing but the fancy dress parade and the blare of trumpets. There's nothing save a minimum of readaptation, a few reforms at the top, a flag waving, and down there at the bottom, an undivided mass, still living in the Middle Ages, endlessly marked time. It doesn't seem to me that Fanon, whom Warwick claims held race as a key categorical term, was the same man who held that the governments of newly independent nations must give back their dignity to all citizens, fill their minds with feasts, and feast their eyes with human things, and create a prospect that a human is human because conscious and make sure. Okay, cool. Conscious and sovereign people dwell therein. And here we go. We have seen in the preceding pages that nationalism, that magnificent song that made the people rise against their oppressors, stops short, falters, and dies away on the day that independence is proclaimed. Nationalism is not a political doctrine nor a program. If you really wish your country to avoid regression or a best halts and uncertainties, a rapid step must be taken from national consciousness to political and social consciousness on the level of underdeveloped humanity. There is a kind of collective effort, a sort of common destiny. The news which interests the third world does not deal with King Bodanin's marriage, nor the scandals of the Italian ruling class. What we want to hear about are the experiments carried out by the Argentinians or the Burmese in their efforts to overcome illiteracy or the dictatorial tendencies of their leaders. It is these things which strengthen us, teach us, and increase our efficiency 10 times over. As we see it, a program is necessary for a government which really wants to free the people politically and socially. There must be an economic program. There must be a doctrine concerning the division of wealth and social relations. In fact, there must be an idea of man and the future of humanity. But if nationalism is not made implicit, if it is not entrenched and deepened by a very rapid transformation into its leads up, transformation into a consciousness of social and political needs. In other words, into humanism. It leads up to a blind alley. The bourgeois leaders of underdeveloped countries imprison national consciousness in a sterile formalism. It is only when men and women are included on the vast scale of enlightened and fruitful work that forms the body are given to that consciousness. Then the flag and the palace where sits a government ceases to be a ceases to be the symbols of the nation. The nation deserts those brightly lit empty shells and takes shelter in the country, where it is given life and dynamic power. The living expression of the nation is the moving consciousness of the whole of the people. It is the coherent enlightened action of men and women. The national government if it wants to be national, ought to govern by the people, and for the outcast, and by the outcast. Sweet. Okay, this is the same man whom Weinrich had earlier said revolutionary struggle is ultimately a humanistic project encompassed by all people. Recall, we earlier used Weinrich's definition of colonialism, which he said is the forceful occupation of another people's land in order to extract material benefits. Thus, it means compelling the colonized to work for the colonizer. Economic interests. Fanon believes that colonialism depends on racism. Enslaving of oppressing another group of people is easier if they look different than you do, and that theft drives the colonial project. It would seem to me that let me see. Oh, we're getting close. It would seem to me that if theft drives the colonial project, then theft would more likely be a key categorical term. Someone could make the argument that Weinrich's definition of colonialism, her belief that colonialism depends on racism, doesn't negate her claim about race. Yet, we must recall her definition of racism, institutionalized assessment of values to real or imaginary differences in order to justify aggression and protect privilege. Fanon does discuss racism and the need to uproot it. Taken Wretched as a whole, I think we have to conclude that Fanon didn't regard race as a key categorical term upon the colonized people should base their struggles to regain national independence. Fanon saw the struggle against racism in colonial situation not only as part of the process of ousting the colonizers, but also as part of the struggle between the bourgeoisie and the revolutionary class forces of the colonized people, as part of the process of deconstructing the concept of race while transforming its material base and building of non-racial socialist societies. At the center of everything else happening around us, we see the Robert Allen identity, a long-standing, unresolved problem confronting Africans and others in the U.S. Finding the proper relations between purely national or racial analysis and programs on the one hand, and a purely class analysis and program on the other. I've always had a problem with the way Allen's proposition is phrased because it suggests ways to perceiving race, nation, and class, which in themselves disallow easy resolutions of the contradiction. If we call these errors in perception or of perceptions, when the first one is made, when we forget the race is fiction, even though we tend to say things like racism is real, race is still a fiction in any sense of reality that we think it assumes through the practice of racism or colonialism remains a shadow or of the material reality that produces it and in which it serves. Yeah, race is real as an idea, as a phenomenon operating through numerous spheres and institutions on the level of the superstructure. The reality of race is only relative, just as the independence and influence of all superstructural phenomenons are relative vis-a-vis the base, the material base. The next error is made whenever we equate nation with race, i.e., when we think that making a national analysis is the same as making a racial one, or vice versa. I know that most people don't see don't seem to know the difference between the two. And in the first place, because they think that race is real. However, the difference is also hard to distinguish because the particularities of racialized capitalism, colonialist exploitation throughout the world, but particularly in the US, has caused us to become accustomed to using racial frames of references as we actually analyze national and class phenomena. Now, the third error is made whenever we think that there are such things as pure national and class analysis within the context of the issue under discussion. That is, we can't analyze nation without giving attention to the class within, nor can we analyze class outside of the boundaries provided for them by the nation. Moreover, a pure class analysis is, as most people perceive it, as is impossible without engaging all the other social activities that it is impossible, that influences and are part of class formation and functions. So they're saying that racism is within class, intertwined. What happens then if we avoid making these errors? Or what happens when we dispense with all inherent dogma, no matter the source, and begin to use the methodology as it should be used, and making concrete analysis and concrete situations, and uncovering what's really around us, and not trying to make the reality fit someone's preconceived notions or models. If I read Fanon correctly, he says that people shouldn't struggle simply to achieve national liberation, but to build socialism. That the struggle for national independence remains incomplete, so long as the construction of socialist society is incomplete. It's within the similar context that I view the struggle inside the US. For example, new Africans are waging a struggle for socialism. We are struggling as a people, nation, within political borders of a capitalist settler colonialist society that uses race to distort the minds and divert the energies of the masses of both the colonized and the colonizing nations. Ours has always been a class struggle. Ours has always been a national struggle. And it has always served the interests of the oppressive societies to characterize our struggle as one based merely on race relations. Much of this is simply about perception or about consciousness. Amun Bakua wasn't too far off when off the mark when he said that within U.S. borders, black is a country. The new African people have been separated and made to live in our own country of color. And we'll stop there and we'll read Amun Bakua. We'll read what he has to say, which is a lot. And then we'll read what Walter Rodney had to say, Kwame Nkrumah had to say. Let's see if there's anybody else. Amilcar Cabral, we're going to read what Amilcar Cabral says. And the coming up things. Hey, look, only 4 minutes over. Look at me. Yay! Trying to look a little ahead here. Yeah, Amilcar Cabral. Okay, good. Yeah. So those are going to be fun to read from these people. See what they have to say about it. Okay. Do we have any questions?
To me, it seemed pretty self-explanatory. Saying that race wasn't the most important thing that Fanon was talking about.
Yeah, he said that all of those are. What'd you say? I thought you were done. My bad.
That's the way I understood it.
Yeah, but he says to consider it and take it because that's what the colonizers use and that's what the bourgeoisie uses. They use this inside the framework because he talked about how the superstructure, because remember, the economic base is the material base. The superstructure rises out of the material base, and the superstructure is defined by the material base, right? And if the superstructure has white supremacy in it, the superstructure impacts the material base, causing for racialized capitalism. So that is an element, but it's not the complete element to get rid of. There's also entail that he mentioned, nation and class. That is part of that too.
Okay.
What up, Doodley?
Hi.
You must speaketh, knoweth.
Okay.
After I win this appeal again.
Okay.
Go ahead.
But yeah, what I got from uh what I'm getting from this and my own reading of Wretched of the Earth wasn't wasn't really just centering race. It was centering the fact that multiple oppressions aren't like aren't separate. They support each other and they reinforce each other. And how to affirm yourself is what I get from both the reading of this book and with the reading of Wretched of the Earth. It's how to affirm and liberate yourself from oppression and realizing that the oppressions are connected.
Yeah, it also talks about the dialects between the settler and the native, and how the settler and the native know each other, and how the native and the settler names arise out of the colonization effort too. So it talks about that, the dialects between that too, and it talks about where national liberation needs to go to, where it needs to advance into a socialist formation, socialist relations and shit like that. And that's where a lot of the independent movements in Africa failed at and became neo-colonized now, and have comprador classes in some cases, you know? But yeah, these are all interconnected. If we talk about dialectics, right, we're talking about engaging with the material, and the material shows racism through the disparities of the superstructure and within class itself. You can see that, you know? But race is a construct, but the construct is here and creating material conditions. Go ahead. Anybody else? Push back?
No pushback. I would have just basically been repeating.
Okay. All right. Does anybody else have anything they would like to address? Everybody's welcome to come up. Joe, do you have anything you would like to address before we close?
No.
Okay. How'd you like the reading? Did you think you got some of it?
Yes.
Good. I'm happy for you. All right. Dooley, anything else you'd like to bring up? Anything that I'm glad you came up and you interacted. It helps me a lot. Thank you for interacting, both of you.
No, I've got nothing else to add other than realize that all oppressions are connected, and if you do one, you're supporting the rest.
Yeah. I don't know with the news about Two Spirit. I don't know if they're gonna go live tonight.
Yeah, they're doing a live on the post.
Oh, they're gonna. Okay, sounds good. So they'll do a live tonight. All right. I have nothing else to say, so I'll go ahead and close it out. Thank you, everybody. If you're in the comments, you're always welcome to come up and ask questions, because that's what helps us to understand the material further. If people engage and ask questions and actually come up with, like, I don't know what this means, and then we can go together and we can figure it out together. All right, everybody.